Hi there, welcome to this video which is looking at operant conditioning from the behaviourist approach. This is planned for AQA Psychology A-level Paper 2. My name is Louisa. I am a psychology teacher and examiner, and I'm doing a number of videos to help you get ready for your A-levels. So follow, like and subscribe. So looking at operant conditioning, look at my previous videos for the behaviourist approach, and then we're going to go on to social learning theory afterwards. So here we're looking at operant conditioning. So operant conditioning comes from the behaviourist approach. I always think of it as a development of classical conditioning. So classical conditioning is very much based on, you've got instinctive responses, that association with something that happens instinctively. Operant conditioning is more linked to controlling behaviour. So what happens if you're given a commendation for good behaviour within school? If you're given a reward, a merit point, how do you feel? This is based on operant conditioning. So when you're potty training, or when we as parents are potty training a child, we use this method. We shape the behaviour for sitting on the potty with stickers or chocolate buttons, or even going back to if you're given dessert because you've eaten your vegetables or eaten all your dinner. This is based on operant conditioning. But if you're given a detention for not doing your homework, then that's an alternative part of operant conditioning. It happens in everyday life. Even going to work, having a job, getting paid is loosely based on operant conditioning. So key terms, jot these down. Operant conditioning is a method of learning that occurs through rewards and punishments for behaviour. Through operant conditioning, an individual makes an association between a particular behaviour and a consequence, and this was developed by Skinner way back in 1938. So originally, before Skinner, there was Thorndike, and he worked with cats. I'll try and remember to put the links below for some of these videos. And they were essentially, he worked with cats in boxes, and he noticed that this is a nice little quote here: responses followed by a satisfying state of affairs were gradually stamped in or developed as habits. Responses followed by an annoying state of affairs were gradually stamped out and limited from the behaviour's general behavioural repertoire. And we're going to look at a bit of writing for you here, which you'll be able to use as a template. So if you get a reward, you're going to repeat that habit, and this is the same with cats and with Thorndike's work. And then if you get a punishment, so for example an electric shock or a pain, then you're going to stop that behaviour. That's the simplest stage, and that's what Thorndike said initially. So I'm going to read through this, and again, you can pause the video at any time and jot this down. These gap fills are really, really good. To give you a really good structure that you can use for your AO1 in your essay. Sometimes they have AO1 and AO3. So the psychologist B.F. Skinner saw that classical conditioning is limited to existing behaviours that are reflexively elicited, and it doesn't count for new behaviours such as riding a bike. So reflexively is linked to a reflex. He proposed a theory about how such behaviours come about. Skinner believed that behaviour is motivated by the consequences we believe for the behaviour, the reinforcements and the punishments. His idea that learning is the result of consequences is based on the law of effect, which was first proposed by the psychologist Edward Thorndike. According to the law of effect, behaviours that are followed by consequences that are satisfying to the organism are more likely to be repeated, and behaviours that are followed by unpleasant consequences are less likely to be repeated. Thorndike, 1911, so before the work of Skinner. Essentially, if an organism doesn't bring something that brings about a desired result, the organism is more likely to do it again. If an organism does something that does not bring about a desired result, it's less likely to do it again. An example of this is in employment. One of the reasons, and sometimes the main reason, we show up for work is because we get paid to do so. If we stop getting paid, we will be likely to stop doing it, even if we love our job. Can you think of any other examples that you might do? And also, can you think of examples where you might not get that sort of a feeling of pleasure? I certainly, if you play sports, people keep going back, even if they're not always winning, but obviously the winning makes it worthwhile. So there are a lot of examples where we do that. Driving a car, learning to drive, we know what that ultimate goal is going to be. So definition: an operant is a voluntary behaviour which a person or animal emits in response to its environment. So Skinner worked with pigeons and rats, and again, I'll try and pop the links in below with the research with pigeons, and he then developed this theory with operant conditioning and the Skinner. This slide here shows a little bit more of the work of Skinner, and here he is here in his younger years, and this is showing how he set up his box with the rats. So there would be a speaker, lights, lever, and a dispenser for food. And again, a lot of the research that we get in psychology seems obvious to us now because of this original research. And again, remember, people like Skinner and Pavlov, a lot of the people that we look at the research for, had a theory and they needed to support it with their research. So they conducted the research, they set up their labs, and then they supported their theories. So Skinner developed operant conditioning for systematic study of how behaviours are strengthened or weakened according to their consequences. In the Skinner box, a rat presses a lever in an operant conditioning chamber to receive a food reward. And then, yeah, this is an image that I have found, so I need to credit that image there. So they would press the lever, and they would quickly notice that if they pressed the lever when the lights came on, they would get food, and so that meant that they would repeat it quicker and quicker and quicker, and that would mean that they would be it would work. He did also work with negative reinforcement, where they put electric shocks through the bottom here, and they found that if the rat had the negative consequence, and it's worth paying attention to this because negative reinforcement can be quite complicated. The negative consequences, they'd have electric shocks going through the floor of the box, but the rat would work out that if it pressed the lever, that would stop, the electric shocks would stop, so then it would keep its paw on the lever to stop the electric shock, and they would repeat that again quicker and quicker. So it would show that they could learn those new behaviours. So then we're going to look a little bit more at these terms. So again, pause at any time, jot the terminology down. So positive reinforcement: if the rat responds, presses the lever when the food is presented, this rate of response increases. This procedure is called positive reinforcement. Now, I always teach my students positive reinforcement. Think of it as positive, like plus, you're adding something. Reinforcement, you want to repeat new behaviour. Okay, you're giving a reward, like a chocolate button, because you're reinforcing new behaviour. Negative reinforcement, this is where it starts to get confusing, but reinforcement means you want to create a new behaviour, and a negative is that the person or the animal wants to avoid the negative consequence. So think of our rats that I just used that example. Electric shock coming through the floor of the box that they're in. They don't want that electric shock, so they quickly press the lever, and that makes them the electric shock stop. So then they've created that new behavior, pressing the lever. The really good example that I use with my students that we have in humans is when you get into the car, and if your mum or your dad started driving and you hadn't put your seatbelt on, what would happen? You'd get a beep, 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 beep. You'd put your seatbelt on. That's the reinforcement. We want to create that behaviour because it's safe, and you don't want that annoying noise. So that's a really good example that you can use in an exam of negative reinforcement. So quick recap here. Can you think of any other examples of positive or negative reinforcement? Just remember that word reinforcement. You're creating new behaviour in somebody else or an animal. So you want that behaviour to be repeated. Positive is you're doing something to get that. Negative is that you're removing something like that pain to stop or to create a new behaviour, so getting rid of that annoying thing. Shaping, so to shape the animal's behaviour, the experimenter reinforces the animal for more and more specific steps. That's when it's something that's more complicated. So my seatbelt example, you probably wouldn't do shaping, it's just you do it or you don't. But if you're training a child or a dog to use the toilet outside, you use puppy pads inside, you reward them, and then you move the puppy pad closer to the outside and you reward them. Okay, I've put this example of Penny in Big Bang Theory. If you type in onto YouTube Penny Big Bang Theory classical conditioning, you'll get a really good example as well, quite a funny example. And then you've got schedules of reinforcement. It's basically a rule stating the incidences of when behaviour is reinforced. Now, this isn't named in the specification anymore. It's just further detail that you could use in AO1. So don't worry too much. but you could use these examples. You've got fixed or interval. So fixed is when it happens every time the person or the animal does something, you give them a reward. Interval is more random. Okay, so interval is actually better because they don't know when it's going to happen, so they do it more. But if you stopped it for a while, then it would fade out, and that would be extinction. Extinction refers to the loss of an acquired response or the failure to make a learned response. So if, for example, you didn't give your dog a treat for doing poor every time, and then you left it for a while, it would continue to do it, but then after a while it's not getting its treat, that would fade away. But when it comes back, it's much quicker than it was in the first learning. Now, punishment is stopping a behaviour, so the opposite of reinforcement. So for example, a child does something you don't want them to do, I don't know, throw a toy out the window. A punishment would be and a positive punishment, although it sounds strange to say positive because positive sounds good. Positive means you're, like it does with the reinforcement, it means you're doing something as the adult or the older person, positive, like a plus sign, that's why I'm doing this, to stop a behaviour. So smacking, not a good example, but it's the only example I can think of where you're trying to do something bad to stop something. It's not used so much anymore. So to follow an undesirable behaviour with a removal of a privilege is negative reinforcement. So for example, a child who misbehaves has her favourite toy taken away for 2 days, so then she stops misbehaving. So that is an example of negative punishment. And there's other terms there. So the top one, positive, and that's where you're doing something to stop a behaviour. Negative punishment, you're taking a privilege away to stop a behaviour. Okay, and they're both ways of shaping behaviour. Now, Skinner thought that reinforcement was better than punishment. This is your AO3, this is your evaluation. So he said reinforcement is better because with punishment, and this is very much in parenting and teaching advice now, with punishment you're a role model, and then you're showing bad behavior. Essentially you're doing the same thing by hitting or something. So it doesn't eliminate behavior, it just sets an example, and you get into a cycle there, so it's not great. Strengths of the behaviorist approach. So it's a really good approach in that it has simple, easily testable predictions about behavior. For example, the effect of reinforcement on behavior can be easily quantified. Treatments based on classical operant conditioning have been effective in treating some disorders. For example, systematic desensitization can be used to treat phobias. So if you've not covered psychopathology yet, you will come across this in psychopathology, but it's worth knowing this now. Behaviorism plays a role in making psychology more scientific. For example, most researchers now accept that laboratory experiments with measurable variables are the best form of research. Limitations. The approach has a general assumption of learning, does not account for biological predispositions. For example, it's easier to learn phobias of some objects than others. Excuse me. Behaviour's assumption that learning takes place through gradual stimulus and response association can explain how animals can learn without reinforcement. Tolman and Honzik showed that rats could learn maps of mazes without operant conditioning. Behaviorism finds it difficult to explain how humans construct new solutions to problems. For example, children can generate plural forms of nouns that they've never encountered before and could not have learned it. Essentially, it's a simplistic approach. It is applicable, it's useful, but it doesn't explain all types of behaviour. Another strength is that when we look at forensic psychology in paper 3, token economies are based on operant conditioning, and also in schizophrenia. So you've got lots that you can use this approach for, and you could write a really good essay on this. Okay, so hopefully this has given you a really good overview. Please watch it time and time again. Please share with your friends. Please follow and subscribe because I'll be putting more and more videos up over the next few weeks. Thank you.